Dena Lynn Gore disappeared on July 17, 1986, while riding a bike near her home to a convenience store. Her naked, bound body was found 5 days later in a shallow grave on a ranch where Terry Clark was employed. She had been raped and shot 3 times in the back of the head. At the time, Terry Douglas Clark was free on bond pending appeal of his conviction for kidnapping and raping a 6-year-old Roswell girl in 1984. Terry Douglas Clark was born on May 17, 1956, in Roswell, New Mexico. His childhood was described as ordinary until his junior year in high school, when he began drinking and smoking marijuana. He was suspended from Roswell High School for truancy, before dropping out altogether. Around that same time, he began taking methamphetamine, LSD, heroin, and cocaine. He later earned a GED and went to work for a bus building company, but was fired from the job within a year. He then went to work for a construction company before joining the Navy at the age of 20. On July 17, 1986, while free on bond during an appeal for kidnapping and sexually assaulting a 6-year-old girl in Roswell, Terry Clark drove to Artesia and kidnapped 9-year-old Dena Lynn Gore, taking her to a nearby ranch where he sexually penetrated her, then shot her in the head 3 times. On July 22, 1986, police went to the ranch and discovered the decomposed body later identified as Dena Lynn Gore. Terry Clark was taken into custody. While in jail, Terry Clark confessed to a family minister that he had kidnapped the girl, had sex with her, and then shot her. At his trial later that same year, Clark pleaded guilty to kidnapping and murder and was sentenced to death, but the New Mexico Supreme Court overturned the sentence in 1994, saying his constitutional rights had been violated and that he should be re-sentenced. During his resentencing in 1996, a second jury again decided that Clark should die for his crimes. The court said the jury wasn't accurately told how much prison time Clark faced if he were given a life term, and it ordered him resentenced. Both juries considered Clark's conviction for the 1984 kidnapping and rape of a 6-year-old Roswell girl when they sentenced Clark to die. Clark has always maintained his innocence in that crime, and his lawyers argued that the juries should not have been told about the conviction. In 1999, Clark waived his appeals, fired his attorneys, and wrote letters asking to die. He said he was at peace with his crime and he wanted to be executed. In July, the state Supreme Court upheld the death sentence for Clark. The U.S. Supreme Court denied a challenge from lawyers that questioned Clark's state of mind and competence to accept his death sentence. On July 14, 2000, attorneys filed a petition for habeas corpus, challenging Clark's conviction and sentence. However, Clark personally wrote to the judge and requested that the petition be dismissed. Judge Bonim held a 4-day hearing, at which various mental health experts and others testified concerning Clark's mental competence. On August 10, 2001, Judge Bonim held that Clark was mentally competent to waive further review of his case, and dismissed the habeas corpus petition as Clark had requested. The judge set Clark's execution for November 6, 2001. An attorney attempted to obtain review of Judge Bonim's ruling in the New Mexico Supreme Court, but Clark wrote to that court and asked that the petition filed on his behalf be dismissed. Terry Douglas Clark waived his appeals in 1999 and was executed on November 6, 2001. 2 weeks prior to the scheduled execution, Clark was escorted from his cell and placed in a holding cell. 6 officers were assigned to 24-hour death watch shifts. During these final 2 weeks, Clark received visits from attorneys, clergy, and his girlfriend. He requested Long John Silver's fish and shrimp as his last meal. He did not want dessert. At exactly 7 p.m. on November 6, 2001, he was escorted from his cell to the death chamber, visibly shaken and mildly sobbing. The team assisted him as his whole body was trembling. He was strapped down to the table and an IV was inserted. The warden and clergy had brief words with him. Warden Tim Lemaster read the death warrant and asked Clark if he had any last words, to which he replied, 15 minutes. The curtains were opened for the witnesses, 20 as per state law, and the drugs were injected. The office of the medical examiner pronounced Terry D. Clark dead at 7:10 p.m. He is the first New Mexico inmate to be executed in 41 years, and the first ever to be executed by means of lethal injection. The last execution in New Mexico, before the execution of Terry Douglas Clark, was on January 8, 1960, when David Nelson became the only person to die in the state's gas chamber. The witnesses were escorted out of the facility and the body released to the medical examiner. Because of Dena Lynn Gore, the state's appellate bond law was changed to prevent people convicted of certain felonies, such as rape, from being free on bail while they appeal. Clark had been out on $50,000 bond pending appeal of a 1985 conviction of raping a 6-year-old Roswell girl when he snatched Dena from her bike and raped and killed her. The change was called the Dena Lynn Gore Law. Willis and Williams Lehrman helped make it a reality 2 years after Dena's death. It was Bill 51. And it was meant to keep some offenders like child molesters behind bars. Everyone was so upset with the legal system and the way a man like Terry Clark could have been let out of jail. But it was just such a shame that a little girl had to die.